Thanks, everyone, and thanks for being here. I'm Nick Finio. I'm the Associate Director of the National Center for Smart Growth at the University of Maryland, College Park. It's good to be here in Anne Arundel County. I live in Montgomery County, but it's good to see some familiar faces. And I do have some slides that I want to go through, not a lecture, just some brief highlights from the report that Secretary Day mentioned. So if you all could bring up those slides for me, I would appreciate it, unless I have control here. I do, great. But before I do that, I want to say, just reflecting on the commentary that we just had on the introductions, Maryland has been seen as a leader in urban planning and land use planning for a long time. And I'm going to say that because I'm at the National Center for Smart Growth, which was founded during the Glendenning administration, and many of you in the room were here in the 1980s and 1990s and conversations about sprawl and reactions to sprawl. And Maryland really did a lot that a lot of other states didn't do. And we have, I think, been to some degree victims of our own success in that regard. We have protected a lot of land. Think about the South County or Montgomery County's Agricultural Reserve, or Howard County, the western part of Howard County, or Baltimore County too. We've protected a lot of land, but we've backed ourselves into a corner as we've continued to grow, and housing costs are continuing to escalate. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. We heard in the beginning of the presentation mention of the federal shutdown. So this is, I just want to give a little perspective on how the economy in Maryland has been doing since the early 90s. We've grown a lot. There are 700,000 more jobs in this state versus 30 years ago, and we've recovered since and exceeded where we were before COVID, right? So Maryland has grown. What you'll notice about the very end of that graph is that we've slowed down, and that growth is sort of in this precarious position where it's, is that line going to start trending down? And one factor there is, of course, federal employment. So these are folks who have federal jobs in the Baltimore metropolitan area. You can see we're falling off a cliff at the end there, and the cruelty of the government shutdown. The irony here is that we can't actually tell the most recent data because the government's not putting out new statistics about jobs at the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we've lost already maybe 5,000 jobs at the federal level in the Baltimore metropolitan area. And then if you look at the Washington area, where there's, of course, many, many more, we've already lost 20,000 jobs. And that line is going to keep dropping. But I wanted to do the long view here because you can see that we've done this before. In the early 90s in the Clinton administration, the government shrank then, and we survived, and we continued to grow, back to that slide that I showed at the beginning, right? So it's not the sky is falling, but I think we do need to keep this in perspective that we're going to lose well-paying jobs, which are really the base of a lot of our economic growth. And here's the chart for Anne Arundel County. This is total employment in Anne Arundel, which has also trended up almost 100,000 jobs more here in Anne Arundel County in the last 30 years. The state is growing, but you all are aware of demographics. Maryland is an aging place, right? Our population of 65 and over is going to grow. People are having fewer children. Immigration is declining, or even going to be zero this year from international. So we're adding new households, but that growth is going to slow down. So that's what that tail end of the chart there, which is a projection from the State Department of Planning, is showing. We're not growing at the same clip that we have been. Anne Arundel, I think, is unique to some other parts of the state because Anne Arundel is actually adding people in every single income category, but there's a few that stand out here. If you look at the side of the chart that's 80% and below, since 2013, Anne Arundel has added a ton of people in the less than 30 to 49, and 50 to 79% of AMI categories. And I'm mentioning that because we're not really adding a ton of housing in those categories, right? Those are the people who are most challenged in paying for housing, right? But the county is adding a lot of folks there, and we're also adding a lot at the top end, right? So people who can afford to pay more. This is a chart that I had a student work on for me. This is migration data from the IRS, and I think this just shows the attraction that Anne Arundel offers. We've heard this mentioned. It's a great place to live. This comes from the IRS, so it's looking at tax data, right? Where are people who paid taxes somewhere else before, and now they're in Anne Arundel? Where did they come from? And you can see that Anne Arundel, over this 10-year period, is pulling a ton of people from Prince George's, Montgomery, Howard, D.C., places that are more expensive. But simultaneously, Anne Arundel is losing people to the Eastern Shore and lower-cost places like Carroll or Frederick, right? And I'm sure you all know people who have made that choice who don't want to pay for housing here anymore. Just a brief thing on housing supply. So, along with that population growth and that jobs growth, Anne Arundel's been adding a ton of housing units. You all see that in your daily lives, right? Over the past 5 years, they added here in Anne Arundel about 6,000 single-family units and more than 1,500 multifamily. That is basically dead even with the state population. 10% of construction happened here, so commend the county executive for getting that growth and the mayor for getting that growth here in Anne Arundel. Of course, you'd want to see more construction than your share of population if you're really trying to build up, but you're at least at the baseline. I'll spare the gory details of what we did here, but in the report for Secretary Day, we found that there's a shortage of zoned land at high densities in Anne Arundel County. There's a shortage statewide, but Anne Arundel is a piece of that. And this is a back-of-the-envelope quick calculation that we need at least 400 more acres of land that could be zoned for townhouses or apartments in the county, and that's assuming the population growth that we're going to get, which could be higher. And we heard some of this mentioned from Dr. Brown's presentation earlier. We have 47% of renter households here are cost burdened. That shares higher for minority groups. It's even higher for seniors. If you're a senior and you're a renter in Anne Arundel or in Maryland, you're going to have a challenging time affording housing. I'm sure you all know that. These are some statistics about what those housing gaps are. There are just simply not enough homes available for people, especially in the 30% of AMI and below. Just going to breeze through these here at the end. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is the burden of this housing crisis on disabled folks. More than a third of our our 0 to 30% of income households have a disabled family member in their household, right? So that's someone that has to be taken care of as an additional expense burden on the household, in addition to the housing cost when incomes are very low. So that's something we need to keep in mind with our conversations today. And this chart got a little messed up, but I think this one was a big finding for us. If you go back to the year 2000, 70% of households in Anne Arundel County could afford to buy a home at the median price. And in 2022, that had dipped all the way down to 58%. And if I were to update this chart for 2025, it'd be going further down, right? So, a huge chunk of the county, households in the county, simply, homeownership is off the table, right? Which is a shame for those individual households, but it puts an additional burden on folks who are renting, right? Because now those people who would have bought a house are going to be in the rental market, right? And then they're going to increase rental prices, and the people at the bottom end are going to have to pay even more. And there's just a little chart about the owner gap. But if you have any questions about data or the report or Anne Arundel County generally, we're happy to help out at the university. So just setting the stage for conversation today.
Thank you, Dr. Finio. Excellent information.